Hello, everyone, and welcome to North Korea, Perspective of Asian Youth. I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight, Professor Vogel.
How do you?
He received his PhD in Harvard in 1958 and became professor.
Why don't we sit down?
Yes. And became professor in 1967. During his tenure, he taught courses in Chinese society, Japanese society, and industrial East Asia. In addition to teaching at Harvard, Professor Vogel also held several leadership positions at the college. This included his position as director of Harvard's East Asian Research Center. Outside of the college, Professor Vogel was director of the program on U.S.-Japan relations at the Center of International Affairs from 1980 to 1987. In 1993, he took a 2-year leave of absence to serve on the National Intelligence Officer as National Intelligence Officer for East Asia at the National Intelligence Council. Today, Professor Vogel is officially retired, but he remains active in research and East Asia-related activities and travels frequently to the region. Again, let us welcome our panelist and Professor Ezra Vogel.
Thank you very much. Some of you may know that about 15 years ago, Harvard started a fund drive. No sooner had we started the fund drive than the stock market started going up. And then after the drive was closed, the stock market started going down. So it was a very fortunate thing for Harvard. And some people have wondered how it was that Harvard was able to influence the stock market in that way to be so successful. Now, some of you may have wondered how the organizers of tonight's panel were able to influence all those 6 countries to sign the agreement just 2 days before we had our meeting this evening. In any case, it's a very timely signature, and the fact that we've had the signing just 2 days ago of this new agreement, the first one in 13 years, means that we are able now to have a very different kind of question and to raise all kinds of new issues about where do we go from here. So we're very happy to welcome now the students from the various countries. There were 6 countries involved in the talks, and we've done it one better. We have people from 7 countries involved in our discussion. I will introduce them in order. Mr. Zaidel Baharudin is a 4th-year electrical engineering student, University of Malaysia, originally from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Second is Ms. Xu Di, 2nd-year management major at Peking University, originally from Beijing, China. Third, we have Ritika D'Souza. She's a 2nd-year student at St. Xavier's College in India, intends to major in literature, originally from Mumbai, India. Next, we have Taku Horikawa, 1st-year law student from the University of Tokyo, originally from Yokkaichi, Japan. 5th, we have our own Harvard student, Jeff Kwong, ancestors from Taishan, China, 2nd-year student in East Asia, 2nd-year student in government, East Asian studies at Harvard University, originally from San Francisco, California. 6th is Miss Mavis Lau. She's a 1st-year law student at the University of Hong Kong and originally from Hong Kong. And now Mr. Vikram Parsani, 2nd-year electrical engineering major at National University of Singapore from Bombay, India. Let me just say a few words about 2 different topics. You've already had plenty of information in the paper about the signing of the agreement. And I thought 2 issues might be of particular interest to sort of start off the discussion. One is the big difference between a negotiation which we had 13 years ago that had involved only 2 powers, the United States and North Korea, a negotiation now that involved 6 powers, as you know, China, North and South Korea, and in addition, Russia, Japan, the United States. So it's a much more complex process. Even when we were having the 2-party talks there was discussion around the edges with other countries. One of the difficulties of the Accord talks in 1994 was that South Korea was very suspicious that the United States was going to be giving in on various kinds of issues to North Korea. And so that was very awkward. Once we had that original agreement in 1994, we then started what's known as the Bill Perry process, where Bill Perry, in addition to carrying on discussions with North Korea on behalf of our government, he had been our Secretary of Defense and was a very well-informed person who had had visits to all these countries, very concerned with proliferation. He's now a professor, as you know, at Stanford University. He led a process with Ash Carter and others and visited all the other countries, but the negotiations were still mainly between North Korea and the United States. And then there was the situation after that where there was considerable progress. I remember in Washington in the year 2000, there was a general from North Korea, General Roh, who led a delegation to Washington. And at that time, we were very forward-looking, thinking that negotiations were really beginning to move ahead. And the Perry process was still going strong. And 2 weeks later, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright visited Pyongyang, and there was a great deal of discussion, and there was hope that there would be a process by which North Korea would begin to open up and that they would finally cap all their nuclear program. And then, as you know, it dropped back during the beginning of the Bush administration, and at first the Bush administration said they would not negotiate with a country that was part of the axis of evil. The United States Congress did not vote the fuel oil that was expected to be sent under the agreement with North Korea before, and so North Korea reopened its nuclear processing and kicked out the IAEA inspectors, and so we were, for 4 or 5 years, we were really without any kind of agreement. And during that time, of course, North Korea produced enough nuclear weaponry to estimate to have at least several nuclear bomb capacity, and as you know, they exploded one of these devices. But the new process now that involves 6 different countries is a much more complex process. It involves countries like China, and South Korea, which are very concerned about their neighbors and how what would happen if there is a spillover of refugees or if there should be a breakdown in North Korea and the enormous spillover this would cause. It involves countries like Japan, which is very concerned about the number of abductees. It involves South Korea, which now has a much more open process since the Sunshine Policy, where they are no longer as frightened of North Korea as they were some years ago and are ready to open up. So it's been a very complicated process where now all these countries are in the discussions and where it's been very difficult. The second issue I wanted to say a few words about is the dilemma that North Korea has. We don't know enough about the politics inside of North Korea, but there's a great deal we can say about the basic situation that confronts North Korea. And the basic situation is that it's awful if they open up, and it's awful if they don't open up. And so they're caught on the horns of a dilemma. If they don't open up, they're in danger of being isolated from the world economy, not getting any aid. In 1990, as world communism began to fall apart, China and Russia decided that they would no longer give preferential help to North Korea on its economy, and so the economy in North Korea since that time has been really in terrible shape. Estimates are that as many as 1 million people died in famines in the last part of the 1990s, and that there is still very serious malnutrition, and that the regime is under great pressure. There is also a concern as to whether they can continue to keep from the people the news that's coming in from the outside. Can this regime stay aloof if it stays closed and the economy stays so still? The other horn of the dilemma is if they open up, they have a whole bunch of new questions. First of all, the question of whether or not the regime can continue to keep from the people the news that's coming in from the outside. Can this regime stay aloof if it stays closed and the economy stays so still? The other horn of the dilemma is if they open up, they have a whole bunch of new questions. For one thing, how will their people respond when they learn that there's other countries of the world are doing so much better than they are? They've been told by their own press that their economy is doing well, that was better than South Korea. How will they respond when they learn the news? Can they have confidence in their own government? They also worry, will they be able to manage the world community? They've had a lot of gulags in North Korea. They've had a lot of what we would call violations of human rights, where people have been shot and killed and sent away without a proper trial. Will the International Committee with Human Rights allow this to continue without some kind of intervention and perhaps even some strong statement against the leaders? Also, will they be at the mercy of South Korea? In the case of China and Taiwan, China has 50 times the population of Taiwan. North Korea has half the population of South Korea. South Korean economy is now much, much better than North Korea. If the South Koreans start coming in with all the money, will they lose control over their own economy? And so North Korea, which has only one weapon, only one thing that it can really use is bargaining leverage, and that's the bad boy behavior. The risk that they might use weapons of mass destruction or other kind of weapons to cause havoc to Seoul and to the rest of the world. And so that's the kind of dilemma that North Korea is in, and I think creates all the kind of problems that we're going to see played out. As you know, the agreement provides that after 60 days, by 60 days, North Korea is supposed to open up to international inspectors, and they're supposed to cap the weapons production and announce where all the weapons are and all their other programs for nuclear proliferation, and that there will be a certain amount of fuel oil before that time. And then all the other difficult questions, what happens to the weapons, what happens to the other nuclear programs, remain to be negotiated later. So this is really only a first step. We have a series of questions we're going to ask for response from the panelists. Then, after 40 minutes of discussion, we will throw it open to the audience. The first question that I would like to ask to our panel is this. What's your reaction to the agreement of the six-party talks? Who would like to start this one off? Okay, Taku?
Is it right just sit down and start?
Please do. The mic is all set, so just go right ahead.
Okay. I'm Takuro Horikawa, the representative of Japan. And as Japan is actually under threat of nuclear weapons of North Korea and abduction as well of North Korea. So we're actually really urgent, situation. So we want to solve this problem as soon as possible. So the basic agreement which was got in this six-party talks was really meaningful for us. So we just want to cooperate with other 5 countries and finish, try our best to finish this problem.
Some people in Japan now are saying they're afraid that because they're not offering any money until the abductee problem is solved, that Japan will be left behind. What do you think about that?
Right. There is really, we don't really pay money for that things too, But there's a problem of abduction. It's a really big problem for us. And this, because if, because until 1980s, the North Korean workers were coming into Japan, kidnapped children or maybe like women to go back to North Korea, and they were taught as spies and the stuff. And it was actually the threat and the challenge for our state. So as a state, we can't really compromise for that problem. I mean, so that's why we cannot offer, the money. This is the bottom line for us to keep. So we're just going to keep it.
Okay, who wants to go next? Yes, Mr. Zaidel.
Right. I guess the Malaysian public view is this. We are against any form of weapons of mass destruction. We don't think that the axis of evil should have weapons of mass destruction. But we also think that the axis of good should not also have weapons of mass destruction. We believe that North Korea should not have weapons of mass destruction, but we also believe China, Russia, India, and even United States should not have weapons of mass destruction because there's nothing good coming from weapons of mass destruction. Hence, probably the whole ASEAN bloc and the East Asia are very happy with this new agreement. But let me remind, or I think we should remind that when discussing, since we do not want North Korea to be like the bad boy, hence we need not to give everything to them. It must not seem that the world is kowtowing to North Korea. We must know where our boundary is, and we must let them know that, hey, look, this thing is bad, we don't like it, and so negotiations, we must have talks, but we also must be tough at the same time.
Very good. Next. Yes, Miss Lau.
I'm a delegate from Hong Kong. Actually, on this issue concerning diplomatic relations, actually Hong Kong, since it is a territory and it is within the territory of the People's Republic of China, we are not going to establish any particular stance in that, because in the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration, it has been said that foreign affairs and defense issues are not to be interfered by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. However, so on this, we are taking this territorial advantage of Hong Kong in order to explore this question. And on this, we are going to take a more independent and a more objective and balanced way to view all this issue. So overall, concerning the nuclearization of North Korea, we would think that tolerance, patience, and actually negotiations are really necessary. Although these measures may be costly if it takes a very long time in order to reach a compromise, however, we still believe that negotiations and tolerance is important. We believe that world peace is what every nation, including Asian countries, neighboring countries of North Korea, as well as all nations in the world, are what we are looking for. So that's why, in order to achieve world peace, the most important measure is that we can, in the six-party talks, the U.S. and some other parties will kind of step back, and they can really take a more sensible way, and not only to force North Korea to have a total dismantlement of their nuclear weapons, and then not only to force them to have complete dismantlement before there can be any guarantees of security. I mean, this is a relatively insensible method, and it's an impatient method to achieve world peace.
What if North Korea doesn't give up its weapons program? What if it keeps producing more weapons and doesn't sign any agreements?
Thanks for your question. Concerning this, we would think that generally it is kind of like a chicken and egg problem, like the cause and effect problem. For the cause, it may be that the U.S. is saying, well, we're going to give you an economic sanction on that if you don't have a complete dismantlement of the nuclear weapons. But then the cause will be that they will continue with that nuclear program. But then I think North Korea it is trying to integrate into the world economy. So we, as our nations, we should try to tolerate it and to let it integrate into the international community.
Okay, who's next? Who else wants to comment? Yeah, Ms. Shudi.
I'm from Peking University. I just think that as China, we just greatly appreciate the agreement that we all know that the North Korea will has promised to stop its nuclear program in exchange of a package of aims. And that's just a big step towards the final peaceful address of the issue. But I think that the most important thing we should realize, it is a big step, but it's also the first step. There's still a long, long way to go. So maybe next, China will contribute and just devote itself to promoting the agreement, go more further, just like making sure that Pyongyang will keep its promise, all the support will be delivered on time, which will, I think, will push the final solution of this issue.
Do you think China would be willing to withhold supplies of grain and fuel if North Korea does not comply with the agreements?
I think that actually China are not against all kinds of economic sanctions, but we suggest that it should be limited to a certain level. Because we all know the structure of Kim is the wealth just goes first to the military, and then the governor, and finally it's the people. So when we cut the implied supply to the North Korea, it is the people that will get a greater hurt who should not take this punishment. And furthermore, it's for the humanism. If the sanctions is too great, maybe it'll force country to give up the nuclear program, as we hope that they will do. But also, it is possible that it will push the country more inimical, that even to proliferate the nuclear weapons, maybe to the tourism, or even it may cause the war.
Ritika, what do you think?
I think that this step has averted a major international crisis. And in that, we are very happy because this issue, North Korea possessing weapons, possessing nuclear weapons, does not just affect the 6 countries who were part of the talks, but everyone across the world. So we're cautiously happy because India has traditionally been worried about proliferation in the region. We'll just wait to see how much of the deal is actually stuck to and followed.
Now that India and Pakistan and North Korea may be nuclear powers, do you think other countries will also start to spread?
I hope not. I don't think India went nuclear with the intention of sparking off an arms race in the region. We had other considerations to look at. We were a non-aligned state. We didn't fall under the US's protective nuclear umbrella. And we did also, we had China, which was a nuclear state at the time. And our relations with China haven't always been the best. So we had our own, I mean, we didn't do it. Pakistan probably went nuclear because India went nuclear, but India didn't go nuclear for the same reasons. We had other considerations, and we hope that people recognize that. And so far, we've always shown ourselves to be a responsible nuclear nation, which I think is also really important.
Vikram, what do you think about Singapore?
Well, speaking on behalf of the country that I've called home for about 4.5 years now,
Originally from India, now in Singapore.
Singapore welcomed this agreement wholeheartedly. We think it's a good step in the right direction. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also warned that the road would be long, the road ahead would be pretty long, and that all parties concerned would have to stick to the agreements that they set out. Personally, I tend to be pessimistic about the agreement. Firstly, because I tend to feel that the U.S., which has been the main actor in this agreement, the U.S. and China, well, they're offering a bit too much in exchange for a bit less. They're giving North Korea, they're dismantling one plant, the Yongbyon plant, and in exchange they're giving North Korea 500,000 tons of fuel, which can also be used to make nuclear weapons. The second point to take into consideration would be perhaps that it's strange to notice that the U.S. has taken such a dramatic turnaround in its foreign policy, given that it just recently, a few months ago, labeled North Korea as a significant component of this axis of evil. And thirdly, historically, North Korea hasn't stuck to many of the agreements that have been reached at the 6-party talks. So personally, I tend to be pessimistic. I just hope things will turn out for the better, though.
Jeff, do you want to comment on what your view of the United States is?
I agree with Vikram. I think I have a pessimistic view. I think most Americans in this room, we've been through the 90s under the Clinton administration and we're promised under 94 a great framework that the same things that will happen, and we've waited for over a decade now, and this new framework seems to be even have less stringent criteria. If you look into it, there's no deadline for North Korea to go back into the NPT treaty. It has no deadline for them to actually accomplish the goals of removing the uranium facilities. It actually doesn't even mention the uranium facilities, which was a root problem in 1994. So I think a lot of these problems, Americans are thinking behind their head that, before we self-congratulate ourselves, I think there's still a long road ahead, and there's always this constant question of whether North Korea will actually comply, which I think that's the main concern.
We've already discussed partly the number 2 question, so what I'll do is skip to what we'd originally number 3, which is what will it take for North Korea to open up to the world? Who would like to comment about their ideas of what it would take for North Korea to open up to the world?
I have a sarcastic.
You're welcome to be sarcastic. Zaidel?
Well, I think it's if Kim Jong-il would die, that's one. Or, I don't know, a self-imposed revolution or anything. We could hope that the North Korea would follow the same step as China did when it opened up in the 1970s, in the era, I believe, in Deng Xiaoping, am I correct?
Yep.
Yes. We can hope that. Or perhaps a forced invasion like Iraq, but we all know that's not the best way to go. Well, I guess, 1, a change of power, change of helm. 2, probably if Kim Jong-il suddenly had this wonderful dream and decided to be nice and all. Or 3, well, the best way, I think, for us to do is to keep engaging North Korea, to try to educate their people as hard as possible with all those restrictions, and hope that perhaps someday that it will open up like China did, and perhaps they will enjoy the benefit like China is doing right now.
You say that if Kim Jong-il dies, it might be better, but there are a lot of people who watch North Korea and feel that he's the one who's really trying to open up, but he's worried about his military. When you have 1 million men under arms, and a lot of them have perks, if you have a peace dividend, some of them might get a little bit worried. And that if he were to die, it might even be worse, and that he may be the one who might be able to lead North Korea in good kind of conditions to opening up.
Well, you're saying that probably Kim Jong-il is the one who wants to open up and do things good for North Korea, but he's afraid of military, is that it?
He has the capacity as the dear leader of the country and the strength that if he decides to open up and is not worried about the military, that he might be able to do it.
I don't think he should be worried about military. I don't think he is worried about military.
Why not?
Well, of course, with his picture all over the place, when they're calling him dear leaders, he's treating almost like the son of God or something. Well, the thing is, right, opening up doesn't mean dismantling your military. If he really wants to open up, if he really wants to be open, it doesn't have to be open at one shot, saying, hey, we embrace capitalism, come in and invest in us. No, he can do it steps by step. But do we see that? No. What we're seeing is this bad propaganda that he keeps starving his people for the world's attention, and when everything else fails, he decided to make weapons of mass destruction, so that now the world would turn into him. Now, I don't see this as a person who wants change. I don't see this as a leader who wants to open up and benefit his people.
Well, there are some people who say that the efforts to start private markets, which have already changed some in North Korea, and the Kisung corridor, where there's a possibility of cooperation between the South and the North, and also the possible opening of certain scenic spots, which have already opened up, show a sign. But I want to get some of the other people in, too. Okay? Let's say Ritika.
I think I think it'll be economic considerations that in the end will force Kim Jong-il to open up, because I think any smart leader knows that you can't keep too many people too unhappy for too long. And so if his people are miserable, I think he realizes that at some point, it's going to endanger his continued rule. And even if he doesn't care, even if he doesn't want change for the sake of change, he might want it to just stay in power.
Sure, do you think it's possible that he might follow the path, as somebody mentioned, the path of China, in opening up under Deng Xiaoping in '78. Do you think it's possible that North Korea could follow the same path as China?
I think that, yeah, maybe many people think China in the past and Korea nowadays, there are a lot of similar things. But I just want to mention there's some basic difference between these two situations. That is the control of power in North Korea now, whatever in politics, in economy, or the social conditions. Yeah, we can just say that, just as what Zaidian mentioned just now, maybe Kim doesn't want to open to the world fastly now, just because I think he's just afraid that he will lose control and got all the things a disaster. So compare China in the past and North Korea now. North Korea now just should to control the pace and the speed of opening up.
Okay.
It will go too fast, I think. All the things will mess up.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I think the key player here is South Korea, and I'm kind of disappointed there is no South Korean representative on this panel. But, you know, I studied Korean, and I remember one of the first songs we learned in Korean class was this song called 우리 소원 통일, which means our dream is to reunify. So I think the key player continues to be South Korea as it's going into Kaesong to open up plants, as it works towards its future presidential campaigns. We just had Park Geun-hye come to Harvard, who's likely a presidential candidate in the upcoming South Korean elections. And a lot of it will depend on South Korea, what it decides to, what kind of humanitarian aid programs it decides to implement under its next presidential leadership. So I think, you know, the United States, on our part, under the State Department, we've, you know, made plans. You know, what if Kim Jong-il dies? What if the North Korean regime collapses? So I think the key player still is South Korea, and we have to support South Korea because it's ultimately their country that is being reunified.
But if you were Kim Jong-il, wouldn't you be worried that the population twice as large as you and rich and that fought against you in the Korean War might try to get a lot of control? Even the people in China were worried that Hong Kong people coming in with rich and money might get some kind of leverage and the capitalists might begin to get control. If you were in North Korea, wouldn't you be worried about that?
I would be worried, but I think the other side, I think North Korea would have to be worried about China also. I think there's a chance that if the North Korean regime collapses, North Korea can become sort of a peripheral province of China. It will become an extended zone for China. I think there's a lot of economic activity already that's from direct investment from China in North Korea. So I think they have to balance these two concerns, both sides of the border.
Taka, do you think that if in Japan they decide, if North Korea makes a deal and comes clean about the abductee issue, do you think that Japan would join in the aid to help open up North Korea? Do you think that if North Korea is open about the abductee and gives the truth and allows whoever is related to Japan to return if they would like, do you think that Japan then might give aid to North Korea?
Yeah, I think so.
And why? Why?
Yeah, because if it's solved, you know, we don't mind giving aid for it.
You know, North Korea feels that in 1965, Japan gave a lot of money in reparations to South Korea, and that if North Korea was opened, Japan owes a lot of reparations, and that to really have a peaceful settlement between Japan and North Korea, that they ought to give North Korea something comparable. What would the Japanese feel about that?
I'm sorry, but I didn't really get the question. I mean,
the question is, the North Koreans think that Japan gave a lot of money to South Korea for reparations.
Yeah.
And if they demand a lot of money for reparations from Japan, what will Japan do?
Right. Japan is gonna, I mean, yeah, we don't mind like for
I mean, you know, what we got to do, we are going to do what we got to do.
Vikram, what about Singapore?
Well, Jeff just talked about how he thought, and the U.S. obviously thought, that South Korea would probably be the most important player in reunification. But as far as I can remember, President Roh already said that South Korea is in favor of reunification and that they're looking to mend the fences. As far as I'm concerned, I tend to think that reunification would require a lot of different events to happen at the same time. In the sense that, as far as North Korea is concerned, Kim Jong-il would probably have to be willing to let go of some, if not all, of his power. China would have to be willing to let North Korea reunify with the South and perhaps become part of a state that contains 20,000 U.S. troops. I'm not sure whether China would be comfortable with allowing so many U.S. troops next to its borders. And the U.S. perhaps would also have to take a more proactive role in bringing the topic of reunification up at the six-party talks, as opposed to just focusing on the nuclear activities that North Korea has been conducting over the past few years.
Ms. Lau, you know, Hong Kong has been one of the most open ports in the world, and you must have some idea what it takes to be a real open economic country, especially when you have a small population. Do you think that North Korea can ever approach that kind of openness that you have in Hong Kong?
Concerning this, I think I'm not in a position to give a stance on it. But actually, I have some opinions concerning what.
Please,
Vikram
let's hear your
said.
opinions.
It is what I think is that South Korea, from what I've read so far, South Korea seems like they have wanted a reunification with North Korea to become one country. But the matter is a matter of time. I mean, because of limited resources, you can't make it a one-step process to have reunification. It's going to be a stepwise manner in order to achieve this reunification.
I think that leads us into the next question, and that is, how can North and South Korea begin to get some kind of peaceful settlement on the Korean Peninsula? What might that process be? I mean, what North Korea, of course, is concerned about is the reunion would mean the South dominates. The South is concerned that if they have a reunion, they're going to have a lot of funny old communists with a lot of crazy ideas, and it's going to be very difficult to keep order. How can you find some way to begin to have a process so that there can be eventual reunification, or is that impossible on the Korean Peninsula? What kind of ideas do you have about that issue? Jeffrey, you want to start this one?
Yeah, I was actually at the National Assembly in Korea this summer, and they have a whole museum dedicated to reunification. They look at every single country, look at Germany, they look at China and Taiwan, they look at all these different cases throughout the world where they have reunified in an effort to find their solution towards reunification in Korea. I think from the American perspective, I think there's still a lot of mixed opinions on whether or not sanctions or the economic method may be the best way to get to North Korea to reunify with the South. But I think the South Koreans are quite pessimistic. You know, they've run their economic data, and it looks like even if they reunify today, it will mean economic collapse for some major portions of the South Korean economy if the North and South Korean economies unite. So they're quite pessimistic. So that's why they're starting right now to really try to jumpstart the North Korean economy. But again, you know, so much of what we can do is to support South Korea, and South Korea really is the main figure in this equation.
You know, when China first began opening up, there was a lot of what they called processing industries, where people from Hong Kong would send in goods and materials and management know-how and machinery, and would process goods on the other side and then send it out. Do you think that is promising as a kind of intermediate step between South and North Korea?
I think that's, you know, my mom actually started making McDonald's toys in China when, in the late, maybe early 80s, before she immigrated to the United States. So I think, you know, a similar process is happening in Kaesong. A lot of these other plants are being established north of the 38th parallel, and, you know, I think it's a good step to make.
But, you know, for example, the case of China and Taiwan and Hong Kong, China and Taiwan have now been separated. Since the late 80s, they've had contact. And Xu Di, would you like to comment about that process of opening up to Taiwan? What has changed in the relationship between Taiwan and mainland in that opening? And do you think the same kind of opening could happen between North and South Korea?
All right. As for mainland and Taiwan, we all know that the economic relationship between mainland and Taiwan are become much and much stronger since the development of mainland. And Taiwan, we all know that it's limited in sources and other kind of, how can I say, they just need each other, so they went to become more trade between these two areas. And I think there's something same between the South and North Korea. It is that which I want to say is that to open the North Korea, the most important thing is to generate the inner need of North Korea to open to the world. So the first step is maybe the trade between South Korea and North Korea, and maybe between China and North Korea, and just to improve the economic conditions of North Korea itself, and then the country will generate the inner need to open to the world.
If they start with that trade, what will North Korea have that they can sell to other countries?
We all know that, for example, China every year will give a lot of economic help and support to North Korea. Maybe eventually China can just do more of trade instead of support to help North Korea to run itself.
And what will they buy from North Korea?
Mine, for example.
Some things that they could mine. Okay. What are the others? Yes, what do you think?
From my perspective, I don't even think that North Korea and South Korea should be unified. I mean, they can, then I don't think, that's my perspective, but I don't think North Korea must be like open for, in terms of economy either. Just, I think they can, I mean, if they, talk and if they agree with like unifying, that's fine, but it's not the thing like other countries, like international societies forces them to get reunified.
I think it's not so much the outside force as the inner desire. Just as the museum in the South talks about reunification, so North Korea has been talking about reunification for a long time. The only trouble was, of course, in the 60s, they were both going to take it by military action, and that was the dream for unifying it. But that now seems very unlikely, and the question is, how are you going to satisfy their own desires for reunification, or get some kind of peace in the meantime where both of them really want reunification? Does other people? Yes, do you want to?
Okay. I see the reunification between North and South is more like a marriage. And then if, when you meet the priest, both must say, I do. But the way I see with Kim Jong-il and North Korea is more like, I don't. And then, before marriage, you talk and how to dominate each other. It seems that North Korea is being the bride. North Korea wants an American wedding where the man gives, South Korea gives a lot, to the wife. So the way I see it, the chances of happening marriage between these two Koreas is very unlikely because both can't, meet in the middle. Hence, the marriage couldn't happen. The reunification couldn't happen. So the only way, I think, if they will ever have a chance to reunification, as for now, they need to talk more. They need to remember that it's good to have one Korea. And again, if Kim Jong-il is not there, I think it will be much better. Or if someone in North Korea actually wants to cross the border and say, hey, let's be one, then it could happen. But the way I see it is just that South Korea is the one who wants reunification, and the people in power in North Korea is the one trying to selling hard and get the best marriage of it. So I don't think it would happen very soon.
A lot of people in South Korea, I think, are worried about is that North Korea now wants a big dowry.
Yes.
And then they may not want the marriage at the end.
Yep.
But the time has come when we move to our next stage where we throw it open to the audience. So please go to your mics, and we will start with those who have comments or questions. And please identify yourself and then raise the question. Who would like to start? Yes. Oops. Sorry. Please introduce yourself and.
Good evening. Thank you very much for very constructive 8:30 talks tonight. My name is Yoichiro Ikeda, coming from Japan, and now I'm a Kennedy School student. And my question is that how likely is it that North Korea give up to possess a nuclear weapon, which includes that they have already developed? Because the recent agreement implies to me that to what you want, North Korea, to what North Korea want, North Korea needs to develop nuclear weapon. The recent agreement implies this sort of message, because the recent agreement does not mention anything about the nuclear weapon that the North Korea have already developed. So in this sense, I think the situation is not so positive, not so positive. So my question is that how likely is it that North Korea finally give up to possess a nuclear weapon that they
Can
already
anybody
have?
see a future where North Korea would at some point give up nuclear weapons completely? Taku?
Yeah. I think in this, I mean, I'm really nervous. I mean, personally, I'm really pessimistic about the six-party talks, which was held. And because North Korea might just require all the things like forever, and like to get compromises all the time, and they might just neglect the agreements all the time. It might happen. So I think in that way we are really pessimistic, and we are in urge. So we just want different way. I mean, I want different way to solve this problem about nuclear weapon in North Korea. And what I present is like, if America put armies onto North Korea, but it's just impossible. I mean, America is just so now really busy in Iraq, and haven't got any power to put onto North Korea, and North Korea has got nuclear weapon, and Japan is kind of hostage. So if America is getting into North Korea, they might put nuclear weapon onto Japan. It's really a problem. So what I think is the best way to solve this problem is only one thing. I think North Korea can be like, the people in North Korea can make a rebellion. So what we can do is to help it to like do rebellions. And what I want to say is like, because because we are doing like economic sanctions, so that like they might feel like people are struggled by poverty, and they are not going to have like they are going to have like rebellion, but it's not going to happen, because in case of Japan, when we had World War II, we had a really strong bombs attacked by America, but we didn't give up, and we didn't have rebellions because they were not organized.
Vikram, what do you think?
Well, I tend to hold the belief that so long as Kim Jong-il is in power, we're not going to see North Korea give up its nuclear program, simply because the nuclear program provides them with a bargaining tool to get more incentives out of the other 5 nations in the six-party talks, as well as neighboring countries. Related to the gentleman's question about how right is it, I think it's an interesting question, because personally I tend to despise the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty on the basis that it promotes it promotes this hegemony over nuclear weapons with certain countries, and prevents other countries from developing these weapons. So, which is why as an Indian, I'm happy that India didn't sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Related, again, going back to the question, how right is it? related to North Korea, I would tend to think that if developing nuclear weapons puts other nations at threat, then it's no longer an issue of maintaining sovereignty where you can do whatever you want within your own borders.
Anybody else have a final comments? Or we move on? Ritika?
As the official Indian delegate, can I just respond to that? India didn't not sign the NPT because we wanted nuclear weapons or because we want to be part of some nuclear weapon clique. I think it came from, since independence, we've been screaming ourselves hoarse, saying that, you know, if we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, all of us should do it together. Because then you end up with terms like rogue state and who's allowed to have it and who's not, and these are all value judgments, and they're very subjective, so it doesn't make any sense. And personally, I myself kind of dislike India treating like their nuclear weapon program like it's some exercise in Buddhism. It's not. You know, we have to, probably didn't get that. When we did the first test, the code name for the test for the nuclear blast was the Buddha is smiling. But the fact is that if we're really serious about this, we have to take it to international organizations. We have to see that everybody, every single country that has nuclear weapons is committed to seeing a world where there are no nuclear weapons, not where nuclear powers will take their own sweet time to reduce their nuclear arsenal from 70,000 to 10,000 and then crib about North Korea, which if it works really, really hard for 5 years will get one nuclear warhead. So I think we all have to be really committed to this, and you know, then let's start nitpicking with the rogue states.
It's nice to see very idealistic young people who really hope to have all the countries with nuclear powers suddenly give them up. Is there some realist here who wants to give a different argument? Jeffrey?
I don't think there's enough political conviction in this country to accomplish that. I seriously don't think the United States, or as an American myself, that I believe in a country a United States that has nuclear weapons. I think there are certain strategic advantages to holding nuclear weapons, and as long as it's being held responsibly, and I am a defender of the NPT regime, if you will, of the 5 permanent Security Council members. Currently, it's only the 5 permanent Security Council members that are allowed to possess nuclear weapons. I think, there is an advantage, in negotiating in potential, Cold War-like situations to have nuclear weapons. And in the future, who knows what will happen, but, responsible usage.
We have more questions here, so I think I'll move on to the next question. Yes. Introduce yourself and then the question.
My name is Joyce. I'm a sophomore at the college. We've spoken quite a bit from the political point of view, and given that this is the Institute of Politics, that would make sense. But I was hoping that all of you would expand a bit more on the economic side. And Jeff did mention the Kaesong complex, which some people think is some form of the first steps of reunification between the 2 Koreas. And so from the economic standpoint, what are some strategies that could be undertaken? And if worse came to worse and economic sanctions were imposed from a humanitarian point of view, how could you make sure that the North Korean people themselves weren't the ones who are suffering for their government's actions?
Let me make sure I understand your question. Was economic both from the point of view of how do you encourage trade and opening, and also how do you encourage use economics for sanctions? Do you want both of those questions, both sides of that question? Yes. Okay. We talked a little bit about the trade, about the Kaesong corridor and the possibility of processing industries, possibility of exporting some mining products. Some people said that Korean labor, that because North Korea, surprisingly enough, was fairly industrialized before the 60s and 70s. It's not a poor agricultural country. It's a poor country. But during Japanese occupation, I think it was the north was the industrial part, and the south was the agricultural part. And then only in the late 70s did the south pass that. So what we have is some very outdated industry, but fairly high-priced wages. So one of the questions is, how can you get wages that will be competitive on the world market in order to produce goods that will sell? But then the other question is, why, economic sanctions were tried, but they haven't worked terribly well. Maybe the bank thing helped push them. Who wants to comment on any of those issues? Jeffrey, you want to rest?
Well, just on the bank issue, I think the bank issue was the thing that the North Korean side has been harping on for the last few years. The last negotiation settlement rounds failed, I think, in large part because we were unable to concede on the bank issue. And even relating to Hong Kong, I think Macau is right next to Hong Kong, and Macau has no monetary rules, unlike most places, because it prides itself on no monetary policy governing the special administrative region. So I think the sanctions have worked partially in case of freezing North Korean assets.
I think people know that what we mean by the freezing the assets is the Bank of Macau, particularly involved in counterfeiting and smuggling, and therefore sanctions were put on a lot of these banks, which did cause a very big hardship in North Korea not getting funds.
Yes.
Do you want to come inside on this question?
No, we're not listening.
We have any more comments on that issue before we go to the next one? Okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Barbara. I'm a senior at the college. So one of the main, I guess, issues in the North Korean problem is whether or not we can trust North Korea. And my question to you is whether you think Kim Jong-il is a rational actor, and in the case that he's not, how will you deal with the situation?
Okay, so if he's a rational actor, how do we deal with him? And if he's not, then what do we do?
Rational actor, what does it mean?
A rational actor means that he looks out of his own interests and does what is logical in terms of his or her own interests.
Personally, I think he's a rational actor. Definitely a rational actor. That's why he gets the nuclear power in the first place.
And that he's looking after the interests of North Korea.
No, himself. I mean, come on now. First and foremost, though he's a dictator, number one, he's a politician. And like all politicians, their ultimate goal in life is to stay in power till they die. Unless, of course, if they're Gandhi or someone really nice. But then, you see, there are good things and bad things. If he's a rational actor, it means we know what to do. We must target what is important to him, like the sanctions of Bank of Macau. It really worked, and it really helped a lot. But if he's not a rational actor, let's just say he's a crazy idealist who wants to spread Korean Songun politics to the rest of the world, that the world should be social and be happy like North Korea, then we have a problem. But I don't see that the way all of his actions, it seems that he's a rational actor, and that's why he has the nuclear, because he needs a trump card.
By the way, I think the general opinion of people who've been North Korea watchers was that in the 60s and 70s he was really pretty wild. I mean, he tried to kill all the South Korean cabinet in Myanmar. He sent people to assassinate Park Chung-hee in South Korea, shot down KAL plane. But that in the last 10 to 15 years, he's been very cautious in not doing things that would cause real irreparable damage. I think that's kind of the weight of the opinion of people who are working in North Korea. Let's go to this question up here.
Hi, my name is Awais Siddiqui, and I'm a senior at the college. And I think to a certain extent we came into this forum with the framework and to a certain extent an assumption that North Korea is sort of this axis of evil. And that aside, what I'm really interested in knowing is, like, for the countries and for the countries that you're representing, and I understand why to the United States North Korea represents a threat, but I'd actually be more interested in hearing your perspective on why you feel North Korea is, or do you think North Korea is a threat to your specific countries and to the stability of the region? Because I don't think we've necessarily established that at this point. I think we just came into that assumption that North Korea is bad. But why do you think North Korea is bad? Or do you think North Korea is bad?
I think we've already heard what Japan feels about that question. That is that they have the missiles and now they have the bomb and they've purloined the people. So from the point of view of Japan, and North Korea's been very anti-Japanese, that is a real scary. What about some of the rest of the places? What do you feel? China, Shudi, what do you think about?
I think the most risky thing about that, it is not what the bomb will aim at, who the bomb will aim at. This is not the very this is not the most important thing that we're concerned about. The most important thing we're concerned about actually is about North Korea. Once it's paralyzed, or we can even say collapsed, we know that North Korea, with a population about 23 million, it once paralyzed, millions of refugees will cross the boundary and rush into neighboring countries. So if the local government cannot handle with that problem, let alone the economic issues, the whole areas, the whole East Asia will be ruined. So
the collapse of refugees and that problem
Yeah.
inundating the surrounding areas.
Yeah, I think that is a big problem.
Other countries feel the threat? Yes, Vikram?
As far as Singapore is concerned, while North Korea's nuclear program may not pose a direct threat to the country, it does pose a direct threat to, for example, the stability and security of Southeast Asia. And as one of the main players in ASEAN, Singapore is dedicated to maintaining a stable and secure Southeast Asia. To this extent, this is why we feel that it's important to engage North Korea about what they've been doing with regards to their nuclear program, and why North Korea was invited to the ASEAN Regional Forum as a dialogue member. The people in general in Singapore tend to be more concerned about issues relating to domestic policy. They tend to hold either an ambivalent or negative attitude towards North Korea, but I think as far as Singapore is concerned, the threat is not so much to the country, but more to the region. Yeah.
And what would that threat be to the region?
Well, the Chinese delegate just talked about, for example, if North Korea were to have nuclear weapons, if the result of having those nuclear weapons would result in North Korea collapsing because of other countries' sanctions or action or so on and so forth, that there'd be a number of refugees immigrating, not just into China, but into neighboring countries as well. And, well, in general, North Korea may not have very good relations with other countries in ASEAN as well, so, yeah.
Okay. I think we have another question over here. Please give your name and your question.
I'm Valentina from Beijing delegation. Well, I heard that there is a saying that a new president, well, saying the son of the present one will take over the power, who is much more open than his father, whether it's on, well, foreign policy or on economics. So what do you think he will do on the issue of nuclear power, and what U.S. will do in return for this new president?
You're talking about the son of Kim Jong-il, or are you talking about the new president of the United States? Who are you talking about?
Just the son of the present one.
The son of
present
Kim
one in the
Jong-il?
power, in the
Kim
office.
Jong-il is now about 60. We do know that Kim Jong-il is the only case in the communist world where they've passed on the person who's running the country from father to son. The question is whether the son is likely to take power. First of all, Kim Jong-il took power when his father died. As far as we know, Kim Jong-il is not seriously sick. He's about 60. And so it doesn't look as if that's going to be tomorrow. The second thing is, I don't know how much the rest of you know about the son, but he has been considered somewhat of a playboy. He has been overseas. He's been noticed to be in Japan having a good time, and I think Hong Kong, Macau area. He was rumored to be having a good time. Is there any hope that we could wait for him to solve those problems? What do the rest of you feel?
Well, if he was a playboy, then he'd be a good candidate. I mean, come on.
Well, that's what they said about Kim Jong-il, that he was supposed to be a playboy.
Later on, but he was also a playboy and a crazy socialist. But the way you said it, that his Kim Jong-il's son is not a crazy socialist revolutionary. So if he's a playboy who likes to have a lot of fun, then, well, it's easy for us then.
I think there is no indication at this point that any of the North Korea watchers have that his son has any clear policy of what he might do. And I think the assumption is if there were to be a change in leadership in North Korea, I think the people who've worked on North Korea feel the most likely scenario would probably be military. That it would probably, if you have 1 million people in arms, they have the power. If you're going to have change and threat to security, who's likely to move in? I think everybody expects it would most likely be the military. Jeffrey?
there were reports that his son was visiting Beijing last month, so I don't know if there was an indication that he's meeting with leaders in Peking, but it looks there may be some clues that may be forthcoming.
One of the things we haven't said about Kim Jong-il is that he has visited China on several occasions. And on one occasion, he went to Shanghai, Shenzhen, and he looked at their special economic zones. And I think we can assume that the Chinese were very interested in having him look at those special economic zones, and he did show an interest at a certain time. Some of the people feel that one of the reasons why we have to have a big bargain, a big deal, is that he's unlikely to take any steps unless he feels the whole environment is safe. That China, when it moved in '78, it had good relations with Japan. Deng Xiaoping had just visited Japan. He was about to go to the United States. He was welcome to the United States, just normalized relations with the United States. So you had a kind of economic environment where people thought you could really begin then to move out in the open. And that Kim Jong-il, I mean, one of the arguments is maybe he's not so irrational, that maybe he's been very cautious because he hasn't had that opportunity. And I think that's what the question is, whether this big bargain can do anything to make that happen. Do we have any more questions from the audience? There's one up here. Please give your name and the question.
Hi, my name is Mandy. I'm a sophomore from college. I think my question, simply put, is why North Korea? Because, I mean, we've heard a lot of talk tonight about why North Korea poses a serious threat to peace in Asia. But I'd argue that, for example, India and Pakistan and the conflict in Kashmir poses a much more serious threat to peace in Asia. And also, so that's the first part of my question. And the second part is that, I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about how nuclear weapon can be justified using self-defense. Like, you know, some nations should have nuclear weapons in order to protect their country. So where do you draw the line? Like, which countries deserve or are entitled to have nuclear weapons and which countries are not?
Does somebody want to give their views on those two questions? Yes. Ritika?
All right. Well, the second part of your question is, I guess I'm not a very good person to talk about this because I am the idealist on this panel, I guess. But realistically speaking, I don't think nuclear weapons are good for the region or for the world at large. So that's exactly my question. How do you decide who gets to have the nuclear weapons and who doesn't? And when Jeffrey mentioned that he doesn't realistically see America not having nuclear weapons because it does give you an advantage, it does give you an advantage. And you're effectively saying that nobody else can have that advantage, which is really unfair. So, yeah, I guess...
So why should North Korea have that advantage? I mean, like, who...
Why should North Korea have that advantage?
I mean, like, who makes the decision? Like, this country is entitled and this country is not. Like, where is the value judgment? Like, who...
That's exactly my problem. Who decides that America gets to have weapons of mass destruction? Who decides that Russia gets to have it? Who decides that anybody gets to have it? And the fact is just that between 1947 and 1977, when we had our first tests, there were 37 instances of countries with nuclear weapons threatening to use that force against countries with no nuclear weapons. So the fact is, you're not even making us feel safe. I mean, you as in, okay, we are not, countries with nuclear weapons aren't making anybody else without nuclear weapons feel safe. So, I mean, I guess I'm sounding like an idealist, but realistically speaking, there's no possible way. I mean, we shouldn't be looking at entering a future where we have this threat of nuclear catastrophe hanging over our heads.
I think the reason why some people have considered North Korea such a problem case is because they have violated international law of trying to shoot down the cabinet of the South Koreans in Burma. They have shot down civilian airplanes. So they have been outside the bounds of international law. And the fear, of course, is that now in the days of terrorism, they might pass some kind of weapon of mass destruction to terrorists. And because they've been somewhat unpredictable, and have violated what many people consider national norms, I think that's why they have received more attention from other countries. This will have to be the final question. Please give your name and your question.
Hi, I'm Josephine Kim. I'm actually here from the Graduate School of Education. And I agree with Jeffrey. I'm really puzzled as to why a South Korean representative isn't on the panel. Is there a reason for that? And then I
What's the
actually have a
reason?
second question. Next year. Okay.
Were they invited? Was South Korea invited in this one?
It's a competitive process, so we can't host all the delegates this year. So.
Okay. I'm actually Korean American, South Korean American, and I was actually in Korea about 3 weeks ago. And just anecdotally speaking with people, I think it's a misrepresentation to say that South Korea actually wants reunification. The only people who are wanting reunification are the ones who only have emotional sentiments and sentimental ties to North Koreans. For example, if they have a long-lost relative who actually resides in North Korea. So anyway, there's a little bit of conflict with that, and I know the museum exists, and I think from maybe an outsider's view, it looks like everybody wants reunification, but I don't think that's very accurate. Another thing we're realizing is that South Korea and the media is actually finding its way into North Korea. For example, there's evidence that says a lot of North Koreans are sneaking in videotapes of Korean dramas, Korean commercials, and realizing, my gosh, there's a world outside of our communist country. So do you have any thoughts on how the media may be used to somehow influence North Korea?
So how do you influence a country that has closed media? How do you use media to influence a country that has closed media? Any thoughts on that question?
That's interesting.
You pass it on like the South Koreans, I guess. Any final comments on that issue? Jeffrey, you want to?
Well, I just think Korean media Hallyu has been so popular. I don't think it's just influencing North Korea. I think for many of these countries, Korean dramas are the rage. I think there are a lot of girls, for example, in China, last I heard, are trying to have cosmetic surgery to imitate Korean actresses. So I think maybe other Asian delegates have more to say.
I think, as you know, in North Korea, they have one radio station, and it's not open. And they haven't really opened up television yet. But I think there's no question that as you have North Koreans going back and across borders into China and other places, that then some of this media may get in. And I think that's one of the reasons that Kim Jong-il is so frightened, because they have had a propaganda line to their people. And it's out of keeping with what the truth is about what's happening in the outside world. And if people find that, then you can imagine what that will do to the loyalty toward the dear leader. I'm afraid our time has come to an end. I'm sorry, but our time is at an end. So we thank all of you for coming and your patience, and thank our participants.